Hi, everyone. Okay, so we're going to dive into breath. And I am so excited that we get to take a whole lesson to go over breath because breath is one of the most important components of how we move our body with intention and awareness and activating that mind muscle connection. So today we're going to go through 3 types of breath, and 2 are the ones that we're going to be thinking about more specifically when it comes to strength training. But I do want to separate these 3 styles, even though we may not use our first or one of the styles as much when it comes to strength training or bearing load. We still want to understand the function of how we breathe. So we're going to go over diaphragmatic breath, lateral rib cage breathing, which is actually a term that I use. I don't know if it's a term that many other people use, but that just is easier for my brain to understand. And then bracing. So we'll cover the diaphragmatic breathing first and that kind of breath. Most of you have heard of diaphragmatic breathing, and we want to be efficient with diaphragmatic breathing. We're essentially doing this kind of breath all the time, but deep belly breaths, the kind of breath we would generally have in some of our yoga practices or meditation, is going to solicit some of the diaphragmatic breathing. And of course, singing, things like that. We want to be able to use and engage and activate the muscle of the diaphragm in order to get more air and oxygen into the lungs. So I'm going to show you guys the anatomy of the diaphragm, which is super fun that I can do this with us. So as we move into the anatomy of the diaphragm, so the diaphragm sits almost like this top half of a balloon. And the top half of the balloon is actually sitting above things like our liver, our kidneys, and our stomach and our spleen. It sits inferiorly or below our lungs. So when we think about that, we can understand that the lungs will be up here, our other organs will be below. So when we are inhaling, the diaphragm actually descends or drops down. And when that happens, our stomach will usually distend out slightly naturally. And then as we exhale, that diaphragm is going to raise back up as the air comes outside of the lungs, it leaves the lungs, and therefore our organs will have a chance to come back in towards the spine, and then the diaphragm lifts up like that. So I'll just give you guys a little bit of like a front, lateral, and posterior view. So you can also see we have 2 different sides of the diaphragm. They don't look the same because they are encasing or sitting above different organs. So because that right one, if you can just see it from the front, I believe we have our liver, the top of the liver that is along that side, which creates that kind of asymmetrical shape. So from here, let's think about breathing from the diaphragm. And I'm going to sit back a little bit so you can kind of see. So the best way that we can activate and breathe through the diaphragm, I find, is by placing one hand on my chest, the other one on my lower abdomen. And so as I breathe, I'm going to allow my lower abs to distend. And then as I exhale, I'm going to allow them to just naturally and gradually draw back. So I will inhale through my nose, thinking about drawing all the oxygen into my lungs. And then exhale. And just notice what my hand is doing here for a moment as well. And I will turn to the side so you guys can get a sense of it. So I will inhale here. And exhale. And when we think about exhaling all of our air out, we're going to see that this naturally pulls itself in towards the spine. So that is our first type of breath. I think of diaphragmatic breathing when I actually want to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, when I want to bring oxygen fully into my lungs, into all of the villi of the lungs, the upper lungs, which normally we're not breathing in that way. So really oxygenating ourselves. So then let's go into the second, which is our lateral rib cage breathing. So with our lateral rib cage breathing, you will notice this more in things like our Pilates exercises. So what we're looking to achieve with lateral rib cage breathing is having a strong and neutral spine and pelvis while extending our arms or legs in other directions, or while just holding isometrically. So what this essentially entails is thinking about, instead of inhaling and pushing out, we are actually inhaling wide into the rib cage. And the way that we can feel this is by placing our hands right here on the midline of the ribs and thinking about inhaling through the nose and extending out into our hands. So inhaling wide and really thinking about putting pressure outwards. And then exhale, we're going to think about really knitting the rib cage down and then pulling the belly button in towards the spine. So I'm going to show you from the side, but go ahead and do it along with me. So I'm going to inhale wide into my ribs. You can see that this isn't really pushing out, right? It's actually activating in the lateral portion of my rib cage. And then exhale. All of this starts to come together. This is active. So I'll do it a few more times without talking. And as I'm going through it, as I'm able to breathe without talking, it's very hard to do it talking at the same time. You'll likely be able to see that I am able to keep my lower abs and my transverse abdominals more engaged throughout this breath pattern. So I'm actually thinking about holding that transverse in position while I'm using my obliques, my internal and external obliques, what's called the intercostalis, and which are our muscles that are really like the tiny muscles that are around our rib cage. And they're helping to expand the rib cage and then contract. So instead of the diaphragm dropping, it's actually going to inflate outwards a little bit more. Thus, we can keep the action of the transverse abdominals stable. So this is a type of breath that we'll use a lot with isometric contraction, and especially when we're not bearing external load, because what's happening with the diaphragmatic breath is that we have a little bit of pressure that's contained within our torso here, but we don't have the same type of pressure that's going to be maintained as we will with bracing. So our third exercise and our third type of breath is considered bracing. So I think of bracing as holding a volume of air in our core to resist the load so that we can keep our spine absolutely straight. And the way that we do that is we start to build the engagement and the pressure in our trunk. So some things to consider here is that if you are looking to do heavier lifting, Olympic lifting at some point, you are absolutely going to want to understand how to brace your core. Also, if you've ever done things like jujitsu or Muay Thai and you have been kicked or punched in the stomach, you will definitely also benefit from understanding how to brace your core. Bracing our core essentially is not only for spinal safety and alignment when we are resisting load on top of our body weight, but it's also great to protect our organs if we are experiencing a blow coming at us. I got to learn this in jujitsu and Muay Thai. So when we think about bracing, the difference between the lateral ribcage breathing and the diaphragmatic breathing as it comes to bracing is that when we're bracing, we're actually going to inhale through the nose and hold that pressure. So instead of exhaling, I'm actually holding the air inside of my cavity. And then just, it's not bearing down. I'm not bearing down in my lower abdomen. I'm actually still kind of pulling up, and it's this pressure that's coming from all places around the core. So one thing that happens sometimes when people are doing heavier squats or deadlifts is they will brace, they will hold that tension in their core, and then they will forget to exhale as they are producing force. So we're going to go through that in a moment. But I'm going to show you a little exercise that you can do on a wall and to get the sense of what bracing is in response to what lateral ribcage breathing would be. So let's check that out. Okay, so all you need is your body and a wall. And so we're going to come onto our back, and
what I like about this is it's giving us a little bit of resistance from pushing into a wall. So in this position, you can be on the ground. What we're going to try to do first is we are going to allow our lower back to push into the floor. Knees can be right here over the top of the hip joint. Hands can just be right here over your head. I have maybe about an inch or two between my head and the wall. So from here, I want to think about pushing my lower back down into the floor. I'm going to inhale through my nose and brace. And then I'm just going to see if I can drop one leg at a time. Also, you can do this without speaking, of course, and see if I can keep the distance, my low back pushed into the floor. All of this is tight. I'm really bracing. Okay, and then I'm going to relax. And then I'll show you the alternative version, which would be wide ribcage breathing that actually does not maintain breath in my core, but rather it allows for movement to happen and the breath is supporting the movement. So I can still hold this pressure here. I'm going to inhale wide into my ribcage and then exhale. Watch how this drives down. So then I can use that inhale and exhale with movement. I'm going to inhale one knee down and then exhale first. And then use that exhale to help to engage the transverse abdominals to drive that knee back up. So with these two variations, it's just something to play around with and try before we start adding additional load from a weight onto your body. So let's come back and kind of tie it all together. Okay, so when we think about breath, and as it relates to our strength training or any of our isometric contractions, you won't have to remember this right now. The kind of cueing that we do both in our live classes and in the class recordings will actually cue the breath in relationship to how to most efficiently bring oxygen and blood flow into the muscle to produce muscle contraction. So when we think about this, a general rule of thumb, but it is general, there's going to be variances, is that you will inhale to prepare for a movement, and then you will exhale when you're doing the hardest part of the movement. For example, if you're thinking about a squat, you would, without weight, you would inhale as you're dropping down, and then exhale to drive the floor away from you to stand back up. So you would exhale in the most challenging part of the movement pattern, for example. If I was doing a pull-up, I would inhale as I extend down, exhale to pull up. There are going to be times where you inhale in these same movement patterns and you actually brace. So example for a squat, if I was top loaded, especially with things like goblet squats or barbell squats, I will inhale to brace, sit down into the squat, and then exhale all the way, all the air out and drive the floor away, and use that exhale to further engage my core to support my spine as I am resisting gravity and standing back up. And so as we go through all of these different movement patterns, this is another reason why in week 1 and even into week 2, if it feels right for you, I would recommend really diving into the Pilates, the mobility, and the foundational movement pattern building, because it's going to help you to activate the breath in the appropriate sequencing and timing. So I hope this was useful for you guys. It's such a wonderful thing to have in your awareness and in your subconscious as you build this consistency of breath over time. And it's absolutely going to help to prevent injury, help with oxygen into your muscles, and just overall almost create a more meditative state and help to regulate your nervous system while you are doing some hard things. All right, you guys, see you in the next one.